The sun dipped low over the desert horizon, painting the small town in muted oranges and reds. Dust swirled in the narrow streets as merchants packed away their stalls, the clatter of pottery and chatter of locals filling the fatting air. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell moved through the market with effortless grace, her dark eyes scanning every corner, every alley. Her SEAL team had been operating undercover here for weeks, tracking a dangerous arms smuggling ring that had eluded local authorities. The operation required patience, precision, and stealth, qualities Sarah had honed through years of relentless training and combat. The crowd moved like a river around her. Children ran with kites fluttering behind them, women carried baskets brimming with spices and vegetables, and men argued animatedly over the last grains of rice or the price of livestock. Sarah's senses were alert, taking in every detail: the glint of metal under a cloth, the angle of a man's stance, the way someone's hand brushed against a concealed object. She knew danger often hid in plain sight, and here, in this bustling market, she had to distinguish ordinary civilians from potential threats. A flicker of movement at the edge of her vision caught her attention. A man lingered in the shadows of a crumbling archway, his posture casual yet deliberate. He wasn't buying, selling, or talking. He was watching. Sarah's heart didn't race, but her body tensed. Years of field experience had taught her to trust instincts that most people ignored. Something is coming, she thought. Her eyes narrowed as she noted his every move. The man adjusted his weight, shifting from one foot to another, and his gaze followed her precisely. She ducked behind a stall laden with clay pots, pretending to examine the craftsmanship while tracking the observer. Her hand brushed against the edge of the table, a subtle signal to the team hidden nearby in plain sight. They were positioned strategically, one on the rooftop, another in a side alley, and a third blending among the merchants. They would move only when she gave the signal. Sarah wasn't paranoid, she was methodical. Every second mattered, and every movement could determine the success of the mission, or the difference between life and death. The local informant she had been meeting earlier that day had delivered a crucial piece of intelligence. A shipment of illegal arms was scheduled to pass through the town tonight. The exact route was unknown, but patterns suggested a hidden warehouse near the northern edge of the market. Sarah had memorized every detail, every building, and every possible escape route. Still, she didn't underestimate the unpredictability of the enemy. Smugglers like these were careful, cunning, and ruthless. And the man in the shadows might be the first sign of their arrival. She adjusted the scarf around her neck, a small gesture that also concealed her communication device. With a flick of her fingers, she tapped the hidden earpiece and whispered, "Eyes sharp, something's off, keep positions." The response was silent but immediate, a subtle shift in movement among her team, an unspoken acknowledgement of her observation. Her training had taught her that the smallest details could save lives, and in moments like these, there was no room for error. The man in the shadows made no sudden movements, but Sarah sensed the tension in the air. Civilians, oblivious to the danger, passed too close to the alley's edge, their laughter and chatter masking the subtle threats around them. Sarah's mind ran through scenarios. What if he stepped forward? What if he tried to follow her or signal someone? Every possibility required an immediate, precise response. Her hand brushed against her side, resting near her concealed weapon, not in panic but in readiness. A small boy ran past, a wooden toy clattering across the stones, snapping Sarah's focus back to the present. The observer's gaze flicked to the noise, a brief lapse, just enough. She used the moment to move along the edge of the stalls, closer to a corner that would give her a better view of the approaching street. Her movements were smooth, almost effortless, but every step was calculated. She was the hunter, not the hunted, at least for now. From the rooftop, her teammates signaled subtly, a hand raised, fingers tapping twice. That meant the suspected threat was moving closer, and she needed to be ready. Sarah's lips pressed together, suppressing any outward sign of tension. Years in combat zones had trained her to mask emotions, to control breathing, to remain unreadable. Her opponent thought he was observing an ordinary woman in the market, unaware that she was a Navy SEAL, a predator in plain sight. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching across the cobblestones like dark fingers. Sarah's eyes followed the figure's subtle shifts. Her mind calculated angles, escape routes, and potential threats in rapid succession. She noted the position of nearby merchants, any obstacles that could be used in her favor, and every civilian who might be caught in a crossfire if things escalated. Preparation and anticipation were her greatest weapons. Then, without warning, the man disappeared behind a stack of crates. Sarah froze for a fraction of a second, weighing the options. Is he retreating or waiting for something? She moved cautiously, keeping to the shadows, every muscle ready for action. The market, once bustling with mundane life, now felt charged, every sound amplified, every movement significant. The ordinary had become extraordinary, the calm before the storm. As she reached the corner, she glanced back at the rooftops and alleyways where her team waited. Her mind was clear, focused, ready. She whispered into her calm again, softer this time. Stay alert, he's here, eyes sharp. She could feel the tension building, not just in the environment but in herself. A storm was coming, and when it struck, every second would matter. Sarah Mitchell had faced countless threats, but something about this mission prickled at the edges of her instincts. Danger was near, and tonight nothing would be predictable. And somewhere in the shadows, the observer waited. Sarah Mitchell had just turned the corner toward a quieter alley, her eyes still scanning for any sign of the shadowy observer. The market's chaos had thinned, replaced by the subtle hum of evening air and the distant call of vendors closing shop. Her heart remained steady, each breath measured, each step silent, but a flicker of unease crawled along her spine. Something wasn't right. The instinct she had honed over years in the SEAL team screamed at her. Danger was closer than she thought. Then it happened. A rough hand clamped over her mouth from behind, cutting off her breath. The sudden weight of a man pressing into her back pinned her in place, his gun pressing cold and unforgiving against her temple. She froze for a fraction of a second, analyzing the situation with lightning speed. 3 armed men surrounded her now, closing in from all sides. One rough voice hissed into her ear, "Don't move." One twitch and she dies. Sarah's mind raced even as her body appeared calm. Her eyes flicked toward each captor, noting every detail. The scarred man holding the gun, his finger twitching near the trigger, the tallest one scanning for reinforcements, the youngest nervous, gripping his weapon like a lifeline. Overconfidence hung in the air like smoke. They assumed she was just another civilian, alone and vulnerable. They had no idea who they had captured. Inside, Sarah's mind shifted into survival mode. Years of SEAL training, countless missions in hostile territories, and moments of life-and-death decisions flashed through her memory. She ran through every possibility in seconds: escape routes, improvised tactics, timing for intervention. She noted the distance to nearby crates, the uneven ground that could give her leverage, and the nearby door that could serve as a temporary barrier. Her body remained still, her expression neutral, betraying nothing of the storm brewing in her mind. The youngest captor stepped closer, squinting at her face. "You look familiar," he muttered, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Sarah's lips twitched almost imperceptibly, a shadow of a smile. He had no idea how dangerous he was flirting with. Her thoughts raced. Patience. Observe. One mistake and the situation turns. They think they're in control. They're not. The scarred man tightened his grip on her, pressing the gun harder. The metal was icy against her temple, a sharp reminder of the stakes. She didn't flinch. The overconfidence of her captors was her advantage. She subtly shifted her weight, testing how tightly she was restrained, memorizing the angle of his arm and the trajectory of his weapon. Every movement, no matter how small, was a calculation in a deadly chess game she intended to win. Her inner voice was calm, precise. Don't panic. Don't overreact. Read them. Wait for the moment. Suddenly, a civilian stumbled into their path, bumping into the youngest captor. He flinched, and in that brief instant, Sarah caught the flash of fear in his eyes, the first crack in their armor. She mentally marked it, storing it for later, knowing she could exploit hesitation. Every detail mattered. The way the gunmen's hands shook slightly, the hesitation in their steps, the way they communicated through silent signals. The captors pushed her forward, leading her through narrow alleyways away from the market. The weight of the gun against her temple forced her to move steadily, but her mind remained active, noting every turn, every shadow. She saw potential obstacles, barrels, crates, uneven cobblestones, and cataloged them, imagining how she could use them to her advantage if the moment came. Her body was constrained, but her mind roamed freely, planning, calculating, and preparing. A faint sound reached her ears, the hum of an engine, the clatter of boots. Was it reinforcements? Was it her team closing in? Sarah didn't panic. She used the noise as part of her assessment. Timing is everything, she thought. Everything depends on patience and precision. One false move and they win. One correct move and everything changes. The alley ended at a small, dilapidated warehouse. Its doors hung slightly open, creaking in the wind. The captors shoved her inside, their overconfidence evident. They thought her presence there was the end of the threat, not realizing it was just the beginning. Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dim light, scanning quickly for potential hazards and escape routes. Crates, shadows, rusted machinery, every object became part of her mental map. She calculated where she could move, how she could distract them, and the exact moment to act. The scarred leader barked orders, unaware of the storm brewing in his prisoner's mind. Tie her up properly, don't let her move, watch her closely. The youngest guard hesitated slightly, glancing at Sarah. Her eyes met his for the briefest moment. She didn't speak, didn't move much, but the unspoken challenge was there. You've underestimated me. Hours of experience compressed into seconds, and she felt the first step of her plan taking shape. Every word, every gesture, every movement of the captors had been stored in her mind, ready to be used. She smiled slightly, unseen, as the warehouse became a map of opportunity. The moment to act would come, and when it did, the captors would learn exactly why you never threaten a Navy SEAL. As they left her momentarily alone to fetch restraints, Sarah's hands flexed subtly, testing the bonds. Every second brought her closer to the opportunity. The warehouse, once intimidating, now felt like a controlled environment in her mind, every escape route catalogued, every obstacle a potential ally. Patience, timing, and precision would turn the tide. The captors had the illusion of power. Sarah had the reality. She leaned slightly forward, listening to the footsteps fade, her mind alive with possibilities. The night was young, the danger real, and the storm of action was only beginning. The man who pressed the gun to her head had no idea the predator he had challenged. The warehouse smelled of dust, rust, and sweat. Shafts of fatting light sliced through cracks in the corrugated metal roof, casting long, jagged shadows that twisted across the floor. Sarah Mitchell's wrists ached against the rough restraints, but her focus was razor-sharp. Every creak of wood, every whisper of movement, every distant echo carried meaning. She had been captured, yes, but she was far from powerless. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a controlled breath, then opened them again, her gaze sweeping the room like a predator assessing prey. 3 captors moved around her. The scarred leader barked instructions, his voice rough but commanding. He gestured at the crates, ordering the youngest guard to search for something hidden in the shadows. Sarah's eyes flicked across each man carefully. She memorized the distance between them, the angles of their weapons, the subtle signals they exchanged without words. Even their breathing, the rhythm of their steps, told her something about their confidence and their weaknesses. The youngest guard, nervous and jittery, fidgeted with his rifle. His grip tightened then loosened, as though he were struggling to appear competent while fear gnawed at him. Sarah noted the pattern immediately. He was easily manipulated. The scarred leader, however, exuded calm authority. He believed he was in control. But every experienced fighter has flaws, she thought. One is always predictable under pressure. She would exploit his patterns, his arrogance, when the moment came. Sarah's mind raced through scenarios. She visualized the layout of the warehouse, the scattered crates, rusted machinery, the small loading door to the rear. She calculated escape paths, angles for disarming her captors, and the timing needed for each move. Her restraints were a minor obstacle, nothing she couldn't overcome with leverage and precision. The captors believed they had the upper hand, and that overconfidence would be their undoing. To keep herself mentally engaged, Sarah began a quiet game of psychology. She subtly spoke to the youngest guard in a low voice, letting her tone seem compliant while planting tiny seeds of doubt. "Are you sure this is the right place?" she asked softly, almost conversational. His eyes flicked nervously toward the leader, betraying his uncertainty. Small cracks were forming, invisible to the untrained eye. Sarah filed the details away. Each subtle shift in their behavior was a clue, a stepping stone toward turning the tables. She noticed the leader packing near a stack of crates. His foot tapped a rhythmic pattern, his shoulders tense but deliberate. He relied on routine, on discipline, and she would use it. Every human, no matter how trained, follows unconscious habits. She tracked the moments he glanced away, the slight pauses between commands, the way he subconsciously checked the exits. Timing, she reminded herself, was everything. One correct decision in the next few minutes could change everything. The warehouse door creaked as a breeze slipped through, carrying distant sounds of the outside market now closing. Civilians moved unseen beyond the walls, oblivious to the life-and-death drama inside. Sarah used the noise to mask her tiny adjustments, flexing her fingers subtly, shifting weight, testing the tension of the ropes. Every motion was deliberate. Every second, every movement brought her closer to a potential advantage. Her eyes flicked to the youngest guard again. He was fidgeting now, whispering to the leader in a low tone. His doubt was growing, fear mingling with indecision. That hesitation was valuable. Sarah cataloged it, the weak link. He would falter first under the right pressure. Patience, she reminded herself. Patience and observation. Acting too soon could ruin everything. The captors believed they controlled the situation, but she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. The scarred leader barked another command, instructing the men to move crates to the far corner. Sarah observed the trajectory, memorizing the positions. The crates would form temporary cover and obstacles, tools she could exploit. Even the dim shafts of light became part of her plan, providing shadows to conceal sudden movements. Every element of the environment, once intimidating, was now her ally. The warehouse was no longer a prison. It was a chessboard. She was calculating each move before the game even began. She allowed herself a brief inward smile. She had been in worse situations, in hostile territories, ambushed during operations, trapped in buildings riddled with enemies. But every experience taught her the same truth. Fear is temporary, skill is permanent, and the element of surprise is the deadliest weapon of all. Her captors had assumed she was vulnerable. They had underestimated the quiet focus of a Navy SEAL. That assumption would cost them everything. Her mind also considered contingencies beyond the warehouse. If extraction became necessary, if her team needed to intervene, how would she communicate under duress? Small hand signals, subtle shifts, hidden gestures, all prearranged and practiced countless times. Coordination with her team was crucial. They were near, she knew, and she could almost hear the faint echo of distant movements outside. Every element aligned perfectly for the storm that would soon erupt. Sarah shifted slightly, testing her restraints once more. The ropes were rough against her wrists, but she noted a tiny slack she could exploit. Timing, patience, observation, all 3 aligned in her mind like clockwork. The captors continued to move, oblivious to the mental storm she was conjuring. Their focus was on physical control, not realizing the predator in their midst had already mapped their weaknesses, calculated their patterns, and prepared the inevitable reversal. Hours of meticulous observation, minor manipulations, and mental calculations condensed into a single thought. They think they control me. They do not. One moment, one precise action, and the balance will shift. And when it does, they will regret underestimating a Navy SEAL. The warehouse seemed to shrink around her, the shadows growing deeper as dusk fell outside. Every sound, the creak of a crate, the shuffle of boots, the whisper of fabric against metal carried significance. Every pause, every twitch of a captor's hand, every glance toward an exit was noted and stored. Patience, observation, calculation. The storm was coming and she would be ready. The captors had pressed a gun to her head. Soon, they would learn exactly why that was a mistake. The warehouse's dim light stretched across the floor, casting jagged shadows that seemed to twist with every movement. Sarah Mitchell sat silently, wrists bound, eyes flicking constantly across the room. Every step, every gesture of her captors was catalogued. She had spent long minutes observing their routines, identifying their weaknesses, and noting every potential escape route. The crates, the old machinery, even the slight gap under the loading door, all became pieces of a puzzle she intended to solve with lethal precision. The youngest guard paced nervously near a stack of crates, his rifle awkwardly balanced in his hands. He shifted from one foot to the other, muttering to himself, oblivious to the subtle movements Sarah made with her fingers. The ropes binding her were rough but worn in certain spots. She flexed her wrists carefully, testing for slack, every motion deliberate, imperceptible, like a snake coiling before striking. Each adjustment brought her closer to freedom, each moment of patience sharpening her advantage. Sarah's mind raced with calculations. She visualized the sequence of actions she would need, how she would disable the nearest guard, what cover she would use, the precise angle and timing for leverage to escape the restraints. She noted the location of the leader and the third guard, mentally mapping the lines of sight, the distance between them and their predictable movements. Every detail mattered. One miscalculation could cost her life. Her team was near, she knew it. Though out of sight, their presence was palpable, faint echoes of footsteps outside, subtle disturbances in the environment, small sounds they had trained her to recognize. They were waiting for the right moment, just as she was. Coordination was crucial. They would act only when the timing was perfect, when her action would trigger their entry, and when every variable aligned. Until then, patience was her greatest weapon. A distant noise, a faint scrape of metal on the floor, alerted her to a shift in the captors' positions. The youngest guard glanced nervously toward the leader, who barked a quick command. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Sarah noticed it. The leader's pattern of issuing orders revealed his reliance on routine. One slight disruption could trigger hesitation. That hesitation, small as it was, could be exploited. Every human had predictable habits. The more confident they appeared, the more rigid their patterns became. Sarah began to test the boundaries of her restraints. She flexed her fingers, rotating her wrists in ways the ropes barely allowed, searching for weak points. The texture of the rope, the knots, even the angle of tension, all offered potential leverage. Small movements, almost invisible, were catalogued in her mind. The captors were focused on outward control, unaware that the prisoner they thought powerless was quietly preparing to turn the tables. The warehouse door creaked as the wind shifted, carrying in the faint sounds of the outside world. Civilians had long since retreated from the market, leaving a stillness that amplified every internal sound. Footsteps, whispers, the soft scrape of boots against concrete, all became signals. Sarah could anticipate movement patterns now, almost like reading an open book. She could predict the moments of distraction, the pauses, the minor lapses that were inevitable even for the most disciplined. She used her breathing to maintain composure, slow and measured, keeping her heart steady. Fear had no place in her calculations. Her mind moved faster than the constraints around her. She envisioned the sequence: free her hands, disarm the nearest guard, use crates for cover, exploit confusion, signal her team. Every step was rehearsed mentally, every contingency considered. Even if the captors changed their routine, her adaptability would turn it in her favor. The youngest guard shifted again, brushing against her accidentally. She froze, letting the contact go unnoticed. He muttered an apology under his breath, glancing at the leader for validation. That split-second distraction was another opportunity logged in her mind. Every tiny lapse, every minor hesitation could be exploited. The storm was coming, and it would be swift, lethal, and precise. Sarah also considered the environment. The crates, stacked haphazardly, offered temporary cover. The old machinery could serve as a barrier or distraction. The faint light casting shadows created concealment opportunities. Even the floor itself, uneven and cracked, could be used strategically to disrupt pursuit. Her mind transformed the warehouse from a prison into a tactical battlefield, where she held the advantage despite being physically restrained. Minutes passed like hours, each second building tension. The captors spoke among themselves, unaware that the prisoner they underestimated was not idle. Their confidence, once intimidating, now worked against them. Sarah calculated the exact moment when her smallest movement would begin a chain reaction leading to their downfall. One wrong step for them, one perfectly timed action for her, and the situation would flip entirely. She inhaled slowly, letting her plan solidify. The ropes, the crates, the guards, predictable patterns, her team's unseen presence, all aligned in a perfect sequence in her mind. Patience had brought her to the edge of opportunity. Now it was a matter of waiting for the smallest opening, the tiniest hesitation, the precise moment when action would guarantee success. She flexed her fingers one last time, feeling the ropes respond to pressure, noting the exact angles she would need. As the leader barked another order, unaware of the predator sitting silently among them, Sarah allowed herself a tiny inward smile. They had pressed a gun to her head, believed they controlled her, and assumed she was powerless. They were wrong. Every detail she had observed, every calculation she had made, every second of preparation had brought her to this point. The warehouse, once a trap, was now her battlefield. The storm of action was only moments away, and she would strike with precision. Patience, observation, and calculation. Sarah Mitchell embodied them all. The enemy had the illusion of control. She had reality. One move, one sequence, and the captors would understand why threatening a Navy SEAL was a mistake they would never forget. The first explosion shattered the tense silence of the warehouse. Dust, debris, and the acrid scent of gunpowder filled the air. Sarah's eyes snapped open, immediately taking in every detail. The walls vibrated, crates shuddered, and the captors froze, startled and disoriented. Her heart beat steadily, each breath controlled, each muscle coiled like a spring. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The storm had arrived. The youngest guard stumbled, dropping his rifle as the floor shook beneath him. Panic replaced his overconfidence. Sarah's mind raced, calculating the next sequence of moves. She shifted slightly, using the slack she had built into her restraints, flexing her wrists, ready to strike. The moment was precise. The distraction created by the SEAL team outside had begun, and it was her signal to act. A second explosion rocked the warehouse, sending plumes of dust spiraling into the air. The scarred leader barked orders, but his voice trembled slightly under the shock. The team outside had begun their assault, coordinated, precise, deadly. Sarah pushed off the ground with controlled strength, using the crates for cover as she freed one hand from the rope. Every movement was smooth, almost imperceptible, but loaded with lethal intent. Her captors had no idea what was coming. Gunfire erupted, echoing violently against the metal walls. Sarah moved like water, flowing around obstacles and using shadows to her advantage. She grabbed the nearest guard, twisting his arm with precise leverage, sending his weapon clattering across the floor. He fell to the ground with a grunt, stunned and vulnerable. The other two captors turned, but by now, Sarah's second hand was free, and she had taken control of the immediate environment. Chaos had become her ally. The scarred leader realized too late the error in underestimating her. "She's just one woman," he shouted, disbelief cracking his composure. Sarah's lips twitched in the faintest smile, unseen by him. Training, skill, and timing had transformed her from captive to predator. Every step, every twitch, every calculation she had made in the last hours converged into this precise, unstoppable moment. Her SEAL training had prepared her for countless scenarios, and now, in the chaos, she executed with perfect clarity. A cloud of smoke from a secondary explosion masked her movement. She rolled behind a stack of crates, grabbed the fallen rifle of the youngest guard, and used it to subdue him further. The scarred leader tried to rally his men, but the disarray was total. One guard fled toward the rear exit, tripping over scattered debris, while the leader himself faltered, unsure where to move first. Sarah's mind registered every option, every opening, and every opportunity for advantage. The SEAL team entered the warehouse in full force, moving with lethal coordination. Their arrival wasn't loud or chaotic, it was precise. They split, flanking the captors, their weapons trained, each movement calculated. The environment that had once constrained Sarah now became a battlefield she commanded. She signaled subtly to them, a flick of her hand, a shift of her body, and the team adjusted seamlessly, covering every approach. The captors were surrounded and outmatched. A flash of metal caught her eye, a knife glinting in the dim light, wielded by the scarred leader as a last-ditch attempt. Sarah reacted instantly, ducking low and striking with precise force, disarming him before he could close the distance. He stumbled backward, tripping over crates, and fell to the floor with a groan. The youngest guard tried to rise but was intercepted by one of her teammates, neutralized before he could pose a threat. Every second brought new chaos, but Sarah's mind remained razor-sharp, her body a tool of calculated lethality. The warehouse erupted into controlled chaos, gunfire, shouting, dust clouds, and shouts of confusion from the captors. Civilians outside were being ushered to safety by local allies, coordinated with the SEALs' prior plans. Amid the turmoil, Sarah moved through the shadows, clearing a path with calculated movements. The captors had assumed that capturing her would end the threat. They had underestimated her team, underestimated the force of a Navy SEAL's precision under pressure. Smoke and dust hung thick in the air, making visibility difficult, but Sarah used it to her advantage. Each movement of the captors was predictable, trained into patterns by fear and instinct. She exploited every lapse, every hesitation. A kick, a twist, a shove, her attacks were clean, controlled, and decisive. She didn't strike out of anger, she acted with purpose, each movement part of the larger plan to neutralize the threat and protect lives. The scarred leader, finally realizing the inevitability of defeat, attempted to flee toward a small side exit. Sarah anticipated his movement, intercepting him in a flash. She used his own momentum to throw him to the ground, pressing him down with her weight, and immobilized him long enough for her teammates to secure him. The warehouse, once a trap, was now entirely under SEAL control. The captors were either restrained, fleeing, or neutralized. The predator had become the hunter. As dust settled, Sarah paused, chest heaving slightly, sweat dripping from her brow but eyes still scanning. The operation had been executed with surgical precision, every element falling into place. Civilians were safe, captors were contained, and critical intelligence remained intact. For a brief moment, the warehouse was silent except for the heavy breathing of the SEALs. Sarah allowed herself a small nod to her team, acknowledging their coordinated effort. Victory was theirs, but her mind remained alert. The captors had pressed a gun to her head, believing themselves in control. They had underestimated the skill, discipline, and deadly precision of a Navy SEAL. Now, surrounded and defeated, they understood the truth. Fear had replaced arrogance. The illusion of power shattered. And in that moment, Sarah Mitchell, calm under fire, lethal in execution, had proven exactly why you never threaten a Navy SEAL. The warehouse, once filled with tension and fear, now echoed with the harsh breaths of defeated captors and the controlled steps of Sarah's SEAL team. Dust hung in the air like a heavy curtain, shifting in the shafts of dim light that filtered through the cracked roof. Sarah Mitchell stood amid the chaos, wrists free now, eyes sharp and unrelenting. Every inch of the space was under her command, but one figure remained, the scarred ringleader, the man who had pressed a gun to her head, still struggling to assert control despite his disadvantage. He glared at her, chest heaving, eyes wild with disbelief and fear. "You think you've won," he spat, voice trembling. "I've handled worse than you." Sarah stepped closer, her posture calm but imposing. She didn't need to raise her voice. The silence she carried was enough to command attention. "You underestimated me," she said softly, almost conversationally, but every word cut sharper than any weapon. Her gaze fixed on him, unwavering, precise. "That was your first mistake. It won't happen again." The scarred leader attempted a desperate move, lunging toward a fallen crate to retrieve a concealed knife. Instantly, Sarah reacted, moving with lethal precision. Her hand caught his wrist midair, twisting it in a way that disarmed him without excessive force. He stumbled backward, falling onto the concrete floor with a grunt of pain. The youngest captor, still on the ground, scrambled to his feet, but a teammate intercepted him, pinning him effectively. Every element was executed with perfect timing, turning their desperation into futility. Sarah's team worked seamlessly around her, clearing the remaining pockets of resistance. Every SEAL moved with silent coordination, aware that civilians might still be nearby, ensuring precision in every action. Smoke lingered, mixing with dust and the metallic scent of blood, but Sarah's focus never wavered. She had trained for these moments as situations where every decision could mean the difference between life and death, success and catastrophe. The ringleader, realizing that all his men were neutralized, tried to rise, defiance still flickering in his eyes. Sarah advanced steadily, positioning herself between him and any potential escape. "It's over," she stated firmly. "Your plans end here. No one else gets hurt because of you." Her voice carried authority, calm yet deadly. He froze, finally registering the reality of his defeat. His arrogance, once a shield, had evaporated in the face of disciplined precision. She crouched slightly, using leverage and her weight to pin him down. His struggles grew weaker with each passing second. Every motion he made had been anticipated, every reaction catalogued. The warehouse, now a controlled battlefield, displayed the results of her patience, observation, and preparation. The captors' previous confidence was shattered, replaced by fear of the woman they had tried to intimidate, the Navy SEAL who refused to be controlled. Meanwhile, Sarah directed her team with subtle gestures. One guard needed restraint, she indicated with a slight nod. Another had moved toward an exit, her hand signal redirected him seamlessly. Her control of the battlefield was not just physical but mental, orchestrating every movement with efficiency. Even in the chaos, she maintained clarity, ensuring that all variables were accounted for. Civilians and teammates alike were safe, and the threat neutralized. The ringleader's breathing became erratic. Panic flickered across his face. You ka," he started, but Sarah interrupted with a calm, deliberate hand on his chest, pressing lightly to assert dominance without unnecessary harm. "You thought pressing a gun to my head would scare me. It didn't. You thought numbers and weapons mattered more than skill and precision. You were wrong, always wrong." Every detail she had observed earlier, his reliance on routine, the twitch in his shoulder, the momentary hesitation, had guided her strategy. His defeat was not just physical but psychological. He realized too late that his overconfidence had led to every misstep. Every guard he had relied on had fallen because he failed to anticipate the unpredictable. A Navy SEAL operating at peak skill under pressure. Sarah signaled her team to secure the ringleader fully. Handcuffs clicked into place, binding him, rendering him incapable of further resistance. She stepped back, assessing the warehouse. Dust swirled in beams of fatting light, crates lay overturned, and the remnants of the captors' arrogance littered the floor. Her team's precision ensured no collateral damage, no mistakes, every move deliberate, every threat accounted for. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, her mind still scanning for any remaining dangers. The warehouse was silent, except for the subdued captors and the distant hum of the city outside. Victory was clear, decisive, and absolute. Every calculation, every observation, every patient second of planning had led to this exact moment. The storm she had prepared for had struck, and she had emerged unscathed, her captors humbled and defeated. The ringleader's eyes met hers one last time, a mixture of disbelief, fear, and grudging respect. Sarah's expression remained calm, unreadable, but the message was clear. Threats against her were never to be taken lightly. The warehouse had borne witness to the lethal precision, patience, and skill of a Navy SEAL. One moment of overconfidence had cost the captors everything. Finally, Sarah nodded to her team, signaling the end of immediate operations. The captors were restrained, critical intelligence was secured, and civilians were safe. The storm had passed, leaving a clear, unshakable lesson. Underestimating a Navy SEAL was a mistake that could never be repeated. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind already moving forward, knowing that in her world, every victory was only temporary, preparation for the next mission was always necessary. The warehouse, once a place of fear and threat, now stood as a testament to discipline, training, and unwavering courage. Sarah Mitchell had turned the tables completely. The captor's arrogance had been replaced by respect and terror, and one thing was certain: nobody would ever press a gun to her head and walk away unscathed. The warehouse, now silent except for the labored breathing of captured men and the controlled footsteps of the SEAL team, felt almost surreal. Dust hung in golden beams of light filtering through the cracks in the roof, settling slowly over overturned crates and discarded weapons. Sarah Mitchell stood amid the chaos, scanning the space with sharp, deliberate eyes. Her wrists were free, but she remained vigilant. Every second mattered. Every detail could still affect the mission's outcome. The captors were secured. Their knives, rifles, and concealed weapons lay scattered across the floor, a stark contrast to their once menacing presence. The scarred ringleader sat against a crate, handcuffed and defeated, his chest heaving with a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. Sarah approached him, her posture calm, measured, exuding authority without unnecessary aggression. "It's over," she said firmly. "No more games. Your operation ends here." Outside, the SEAL team coordinated with local authorities to evacuate civilians safely. Families had been nearby moments ago, oblivious to the life-and-death struggle unfolding inside. Sarah had always trained to protect civilians, knowing that their safety was as critical as neutralizing threats. She made a mental note of every escape route, every alley, every building she had observed in the area, ensuring no collateral damage remained. Every detail, no matter how minor, mattered in operations like this. Her team moved with precise coordination, clearing the remaining sections of the warehouse and securing intelligence files, weapon caches, and communication devices. Every element had been anticipated, every variable accounted for. Sarah allowed herself a brief glance at her teammates. Silent acknowledgement passed between them. The mission had been executed perfectly. Each operator understood the stakes and the precision required. In moments like this, no praise was necessary. The results spoke louder than words. Sarah's mind wandered briefly as she surveyed the scene. The captors had been overconfident, reckless, and ruthless. Their assumption that fear and intimidation could control her had been their fatal mistake. Her training, discipline, and patience had turned their aggression into their downfall. Every second of observation, every subtle psychological maneuver, and every minute of preparation had culminated in this decisive victory. She allowed herself a tiny inward smile, though outwardly her expression remained neutral. The scarred ringleader finally spoke, voice hoarse, laced with both fear and disbelief. You're just one woman," he muttered, as if trying to rationalize what had happened. Sarah shook her head slowly, the weight of her experience evident in her gaze. "One woman trained for years, working with a team you didn't see coming. That's all it takes. Overconfidence is fatal." Her words were calm, almost conversational, yet carried the weight of undeniable truth. The captor had learned too late the consequences of underestimating a Navy SEAL. As her team finished securing the last pieces of evidence, Sarah took a moment to breathe deeply. The adrenaline still coursed through her veins, but she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Missions like this were never just about combat or skill. They were about patience, observation, mental fortitude, and precise action under pressure. The chaos of battle might appear random to an outsider, but for a Navy SEAL, every moment was a calculation, every reaction a controlled variable. Civilians had been evacuated, authorities were taking custody of the restrained captors, and the local area was now secure. Sarah moved through the warehouse, checking each section for any overlooked threats. She noted details: the position of fallen crates, minor damage to the flooring, and the state of the weapons left behind. Every observation would be reported and analyzed later, ensuring future missions were safer and more efficient. Preparation never truly ended, even after victory. The scarred leader continued to watch her, the gravity of his situation sinking in. He had been a predator, confident in his control, ruthless in his ambition. But he had miscalculated. The lesson was clear: Underestimating skill, discipline, and experience was a mistake that could never be undone. Sarah had demonstrated precisely why intimidation and numbers were no match for training, patience, and precision. One wrong assumption, one error in judgment, and his operation crumbled in seconds. Sarah allowed herself another glance at the SEAL team. Each member moved with practiced efficiency, securing the site and preparing for extraction. They had trained for years, honed their skills in hostile environments, and executed with flawless coordination. Their quiet professionalism, the seamless execution of strategy, and the lethal precision had ensured the mission's success. She silently acknowledged their dedication, their courage, and their trust. Together, they had transformed a potentially deadly scenario into a decisive victory. Finally, Sarah stepped outside the warehouse, letting the cool evening air wash over her. The market streets were empty now, shadows stretching long across the cracked stone. Civilians were safe, captors restrained, and the intelligence gathered would prevent countless future attacks. She allowed herself a brief, rare moment of satisfaction. The mission had been executed perfectly, but her mind was already processing next steps. Victory was temporary, preparation was eternal. As she gazed at the horizon, Sarah reflected on the day's events. The calm under fire, the calculated patience, the lethal precision, it was all part of being a Navy SEAL. Lives had been saved, threats neutralized, and justice served. The storm had passed, leaving a clear lesson for anyone who dared underestimate her. Courage, skill, and preparation could overcome arrogance and aggression in ways few could imagine. Sarah allowed herself one final thought before moving toward her team and extraction point. Every operation was a test of mind, body, and spirit. Today had been a victory, but tomorrow would require the same focus, the same discipline, and the same relentless commitment to excellence. She had faced a deadly threat, turned it against the aggressors, and emerged unbroken. That was the essence of her role, the core of her training, and the reason she survived when others failed. The sun had dipped fully below the horizon, leaving the desert town in a calm, muted twilight. The warehouse, once a fortress of fear and intimidation, now stood silent, its interior littered with overturned crates, scattered weapons, and the subdued forms of defeated captors. Sarah Mitchell moved steadily among the remnants of chaos, her eyes scanning every corner even as her team secured the final pieces of evidence. She was methodical, precise, leaving no detail unchecked. The scarred ringleader sat against a wall, handcuffed, bruised, and exhausted, his face a mask of disbelief. For the first time in his life, arrogance had failed him. He had pressed a gun to her head, confident that fear would bend her to his will. But in the calm, calculated fury of a Navy SEAL, he had met his match. Every overconfidence, every underestimation had been cataloged and used against him. He would carry that lesson for the rest of his life. Sarah walked past him, her steps quiet but deliberate. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone conveyed authority. "You made a choice today," she said softly, yet every word carried weight. "A choice to threaten, to intimidate, to believe you were in control. That choice nearly cost you everything." She paused, letting the words settle. He said nothing, knowing that argument or defiance would serve no purpose. Silence, after all, spoke louder than any outburst. Her team moved efficiently, collecting the intelligence gathered during the operation. Communication devices, plans, weapons caches, and financial records. Every piece of evidence would aid authorities in dismantling the smuggling ring completely. Sarah observed with quiet satisfaction, noting how her meticulous planning had ensured minimal collateral damage and maximum operational success. Years of training, patience, and observation had culminated in this moment, complete control over a chaotic scenario. As the SEALs prepared to leave the warehouse, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment to reflect. The mission had tested not just her physical capabilities, but her patience, mental acuity, and psychological insight. Captivity had been brief, but every second had been an opportunity to study, analyze, and prepare. By the time the first explosion outside signaled her team's entry, she had already planned each move, anticipated every reaction, and transformed the threat into a controlled environment in her favor. The scarred ringleader tried once more to speak, desperation edging into his voice. I could have. You could have thought before acting, Sarah interrupted, her tone calm but final. You could have assessed the situation, respected skill, respected caution. Instead, you chose intimidation. That was your mistake. One moment of arrogance, one decision based on fear of others, and it all collapsed. Outside, the town streets were quiet, the market emptied, civilians safely away from danger. Her team began escorting the captors to awaiting authorities, and Sarah walked alongside, eyes scanning the horizon. Every detail, every potential threat was accounted for, even now. In her world, vigilance never ended. A mission completed was merely preparation for the next. The youngest guard, still trembling, glanced at Sarah with wide eyes. He had expected fear, panic, or surrender. Instead, he saw control, calmness, and precision, a force he could not have predicted. She wasn't scared, he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Not even once. That simple observation carried the weight of realization. Courage, skill, and preparation could overpower intimidation, regardless of numbers or weapons. Sarah paused for a moment at the warehouse entrance, letting the cool evening air wash over her. Her mind cataloged every detail: the positions of the crates, the layout of the warehouse, the movements of her captors, and the precise timing that had made their defeat inevitable. Each observation would inform future operations, each lesson stored and ready for application. For a Navy SEAL, learning never ceased. Victory was a step in an ongoing process of refinement and preparation. She looked back at the scarred leader one last time. Defeat had humbled him, stripped away his arrogance, and exposed the consequences of underestimating skill and discipline. His eyes met hers, and though defiance lingered faintly, it was overshadowed by comprehension. He had been given a lesson in respect, strategy, and precision, a lesson carved not in words, but in the undeniable demonstration of competence under pressure. Her team gathered for final coordination, ensuring civilians remained safe and all intelligence was properly secured. Every movement was efficient, precise, and purposeful. The mission was a success not only because the threat had been neutralized, but because every action had been deliberate, controlled, and executed with unparalleled professionalism. Sarah's leadership had guided the team through danger and chaos with confidence and skill. As the SEALs moved toward extraction, Sarah allowed herself one final thought. The storm had passed, the captors had been defeated, and the lesson was clear: never underestimate a Navy SEAL. Fear could be wielded by anyone, but skill, patience, and precise action would always triumph over arrogance and intimidation. The captors would carry that knowledge for the rest of their lives, and anyone who dared to threaten a SEAL in the future would meet the same fate. With the desert night settling around the town, Sarah Mitchell walked toward the extraction point. Dust swirled at her boots, shadows stretched across the streets, and the faint glow of distant lights marked the path ahead. The mission was complete, yet her mind remained alert, ready for the next challenge, the next threat, the next test. A Navy SEAL never truly rests. Victory was temporary, but readiness was eternal. One final glance at the defeated ringleader sealed the story. He had learned the cost of arrogance, of underestimating skill, and of believing that intimidation could dictate outcomes. Sarah had demonstrated with clarity, precision, and lethality that threats against a Navy SEAL were never safe. The lesson was permanent. And as the team vanished into the night, leaving the warehouse behind, the echoes of controlled chaos lingered, a stark reminder that courage, preparation, and discipline were forces no adversary could overcome. Sarah disappeared into the shadows with her team, leaving behind only evidence of the storm, the lessons learned, and the undeniable truth: never, ever press a gun to a Navy SEAL.